Story time about how I simped over the pizza delivery guy. One weekend, my friends and I were having a girls' night sleepover. Girls' night always means movies, snacks, gossip, and pizza. We called our local pizza place and put in an order for way more food than we actually needed, as we always do. Our order was running late that night, and we were starting to get mad because we ordered over an hour and a half ago. The girls and I started joking about how we were going to tease the delivery guy for taking so long. We weren't going to be mean, of course, no Karens in my group, but we were getting hangry. Just as we were complaining about where the food was, the doorbell rang. We all ran to get the door, and when we opened it, I almost fainted. The most gorgeous guy ever was standing there with our now cold pizza. This guy didn't look like your typical everyday pizza delivery guy. He had a young Brad Pitt look going on, and I was into it. When he told me the total, I just stared at him speechless for a good 10 seconds. I paid the model pizza man and he left without me being able to say a single word from being so nervous. I told my friends that I had a crush, and they started hyping me up, telling me that I should have totally gotten his number. They told me that he was eyeing me back, but I didn't see it. I was thinking about him all night and regretting not shooting my shot. I know it sounds crazy, but the very next night, I called the same place and ordered another pizza for delivery. Part 2 of how I simped over the pizza delivery guy. I had to see this guy again, so the next night I mustered up the courage to call the same place and order another pizza for delivery. I spent a good 3 hours getting ready before calling because I wanted to make sure I was looking fine. I put on my best outfit, had a full face of makeup and everything. The time came and the doorbell rang. My heart started racing, so I took a deep breath and opened the door. I was instantly disappointed when I saw a different guy at the door with my delivery. I spent the whole day getting ready and rehearsing what I was going to say, only for it to be a different guy. I was so sad, I decided to eat my feelings and ate half of the pizza by myself while watching The Notebook. The next day, I woke up and decided that I was going to try again. There's no way I could strike out twice. I called up and put in another order for the 3rd day in a row. The doorbell rang an hour later, and it wasn't my crush again. At this point, I was in too deep to quit now, so the next day I called in and placed another order for the 4th day in a row. My fridge was so full of pizza that if it wasn't him this time, I was going to scream. Sure enough, I opened the door and it was him. He ended up speaking first and said, "Wasn't I here a few days ago? You must really like our pizza." My heart was racing, but I told him the truth and put it all out there. He gave me a weird look and told me he was engaged and quickly left. In the end, I was stuck with a week's worth of pizza, a bruised ego, and a broken heart. My husband and I are in our late 20s and have been married for 4 years. He finished college with a finance degree and thought he'd go into accounting, but quickly found out that it wasn't his passion. He bounced from jobs and ideas pre-COVID, but nothing really stuck. Since COVID, he hasn't attempted anything and said that after the pandemic ends, there will be a boom of jobs so he can find what he's passionate about. I've been working full-time and thankfully, my job became remote. I've been paying the bills and keeping the food on the table. After the fiscal year closed, my work had done really well. We sell medical testing equipment, which was a big product of 2020. I was given a promotion and a pay raise, but also a small bonus. It was exciting because I could finally repair my purse and replace some shoes that were destroyed. When I told my husband, he seemed way more excited than me over this promotion. He went off about how he was going to redo his game area and get new systems. I was dumbfounded and got quiet because I couldn't believe what he was saying. He eventually went out and spent all of my bonus on a new computer. We got into a huge argument and he called me selfish for not being happy that he got to achieve his dream. He called me spoiled for being upset that I couldn't spend money on myself first. I called him ungrateful since I was the only one providing. He got mad and left the house saying that I'm making the money so I shouldn't throw it in his face that he doesn't have an income. Everyone thinks I overreacted to something that makes my husband happy. I've gotten so many texts about being an a-hole that I'm starting to wonder, am I? Storytime about how a stranger hunted me through a national park. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Rainier. Not the official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected to see another human for miles. One night, I wake up and hear something. I open my tent and was surprised to see a guy sitting where my fire had been, right outside of my tent. He looked like a regular guy, but he was sitting just a couple feet away from my tent and it made me uneasy. I also noticed that he didn't have a bag or pack or anything with him. When he saw me open my tent, his eyes widened like he had just seen a ghost and he bolted off. It shook me to my core at first, but over the next day I managed to put it out of my mind. I thought to myself that it was just an odd occurrence and that guy was probably on drugs or something. I made myself believe that he had somehow managed to set up a camp not far from mine and it was just a coincidence. 2 days after this, I had hiked another 15 miles in totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as on accident. I was sitting by the fire that night and I started hearing noises. I was convinced there was someone there. I called out to them and out of the darkness, someone asked me, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I quickly said no and I don't even think that's a real place there. However, they kept talking to me from just out of my line of vision. It only got creepier from here. Part 2 of how a stranger hunted me through a national park. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to see them, but they yelled at me to aim it away. This spooked me and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After about 15 minutes, the voice was still asking me random questions from the darkness. I was so freaked out and it sounded like it had gotten closer. I built up the courage and shined my light in the direction that the voice was coming from. It was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. I realized that he had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days because there was no way that he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot in such a vast wilderness. At this point, I knew it was no coincidence. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. This time I started to chase him, but I didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark and stopped after only 100 to 200 feet. I decided the trip was over the next morning and hiked back over 3 days, constantly doubling back and trying to throw anyone off my trail. I would also occasionally hide and wait to see if he would come by following me. On the first night hiking out, I heard what sounded like a person walking in circles outside of my tent twice, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, there was nothing. The whole hike back I had knots in my stomach. I almost cried when I finally got back to my car and the relief washed over me. Storytime about my paranormal experience in the mountains. My best friend and I live by some canyons in California. We love to take day trips in the canyons to get away from the city noises. We are always cautious of where we park and who's around us when we go because it's always just the two of us. At this time, we were 17 and had driven all the way up to the top where the road was blocked off. We parked, kicked back, rolled down the windows, and enjoyed the fresh breeze in silence. Since we were pretty high up in the mountains, there weren't any homes, stores, and especially no phone or radio service. The little parking place was basically the edge of the mountain, so if anyone was to fall, they'd go straight down to their demise. There weren't any bushes or trees to break any falls. After about 30 minutes of relaxing, we hear what sounds like a woman groaning in pain. We look at each other in confusion because there wasn't anyone around and the next parking spot was another 10-minute drive down. It was around 7 p.m. and the sun was already setting. We ignored the sound since we only heard it once, but after about 15 minutes, we talked about the noise and decided to try and figure out what it could be out of curiosity. Right then, we heard it again, but it was louder. We thought someone might be hurt, but again, no one should be around because there weren't any walking trails and it was impossible for anyone to be below or above. This is when we stupidly got out of the car and used our cell phone flashlights to look around. Part 2 of my paranormal experience in the mountains. We double-checked to see if anyone was there, but we saw nothing. That's when my friend called to me, telling me that she had a bad feeling. Right before I had the chance to ask her about what, her body jolts closer to the edge of the mountain. At first, I thought she was pulling a prank, but the look on her face was of pure shock, followed by her bursting out in tears. I started to panic and tried to calm her down, but from a distance coming up the road, seemingly out of nowhere, we saw an older man limping towards us. He had dirty, torn-up clothes on. There wasn't any blood or noticeable injuries on him, but the fact that he was limping towards us alone and far away from any trails creeped us out. I snapped my friend out of it and we ran to our car. We locked the doors and pulled out of the parking lot. The man was nowhere in sight as we made our exit. After about 20 minutes driving back down, we see the same man limping. There was no way he could beat us going down the road. I asked my friend what happened earlier and why she was crying. She said she felt the urge to jump and felt like someone had pushed her. The next day, a friend tells us that apparently a month prior to this incident, a man, his wife, and only daughter had died up there. No one knows exactly what happened, but the woman's body was found at the bottom. The man's body was found in a car crash where we saw him the first time, and the daughter's body was nowhere to be found. Crime Fanatic Friday, an author whose best-selling book led to his demise. In the southwest corner of Poland, on a cold December day in 2000, 3 friends were casting when one of them noticed something floating by the shore. At first, they thought it was a log, but as it drew closer, they quickly discovered that it was a dead body. The police were called and the corpse was carefully removed from the water. A noose was around his neck and his hands were bound behind his back. The rope had once connected his hands to his neck, binding this man in a backward cradle. This position was excruciating as the slightest movement would have caused the noose to tighten further. A pathologist reported that this man had been starved before he was murdered and was still alive when he was dropped into the water. The victim was 35-year-old Darius Yaniszewski, who lived 60 miles from where his body was discovered. A major investigation was launched, but after 6 months and no leads, the case went cold. 3 years later, a detective picked up the case and was determined to solve it. He retraced Yaniszewski's last steps and found out that he had met up with a customer for business outside of the office but couldn't find out who it was. At one point, the detective realized that Yaniszewski's phone was never found. He knew that cell phones often bear a serial number from the manufacturer and soon found a match with the receipt obtained from Yaniszewski's wife. What he found next shocked everyone. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2, an author whose best-selling book led to his demise. After the detective searched the serial number for the missing phone, he found that it had been sold on an internet auction site just 4 days after Yaniszewski disappeared. Investigators quickly found the seller to be 30-year-old Polish author Christian Bala. The detective checked Bala's background and discovered a recently published novel called Amok. This crime novel quickly became a bestseller in Poland. It was about a bored Polish intellectual who murders a female lover for no reason and conceals the